Hello, hello. Welcome to the Street Epistemology call-in show. We're doing things an hour earlier. If you hadn't noticed, don't worry. The time is just a social construct. We are here at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern. I have my co-hosts Gina and Quayd here with me. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Before we do much, do you want to tell me about who you are and why you're here? You can fight amongst yourselves as to who.
Gina.
Um, I am potentially going to be an SE creator. I have been practicing now for 2 years in the SE Discord. I hosted practice events for 1 year. I've been out twice with my friend Diamond. Um, once with Matt Smith, and the other time with Scott K. And I am maybe giving a talk about street epistemology to a Free Thought Society in Florida come September.
Mm-hmm. By the way, she's a ringer. I don't know if you know that. She's actually way good at this shit. Okay. Hello, Quayd. Tell me things.
Hey, I run my own channel. What's your argument? I don't do it often yet, but I'm hoping to get back on the horse. I'm hoping to talk at some college campuses that I work at and do some SE there. Do it live if I can find people to do it online. So if you're interested in one-on-one, you could contact me at my somehow, I guess, my YouTube channel. I think maybe it has my email on it. And then also I've helped with the SE course that's coming out. I've been doing writing for it and working on teams for that.
Fantastic. I'm juggling lessons. I do SE online and in person. I've been mostly on a hiatus from posting things on my channel for about 11 months. And my next project that I'm working on, I'm editing right now, is I went to Park last week. I had a really good conversation with a fellow Usiah. I should say I had a really good conversation. I did very poorly. I'm very out of practice. I made a lot of mistakes, but I had a very graceful interlocutor who let me get away with it all. So it was a great result anyway, in spite of me. So anyway, you'll get to see that. Little personal news that's about 12 minutes old. My husband Foyle just popped positive for COVID. So
I hear everybody's getting it. Everybody I know that is getting it now that didn't get it.
Yeah, it's the popular thing now. Yeah. Oh well. All right. So my next few weeks just got strangely carefuler and very indoors. I'll be seeing you a lot online, but that's okay. My antivirus software is up to date. Anyway, so if anybody is willing to call in, talk to us, there's a link in the comments. Yes, comments there. You can sign into StreamYard and come and talk to us, ask us questions, yell at us, tell us we're doing it wrong, all those kinds of things we're very open to. Anyway, so while we wait for a caller, anybody got any topics you'd like to discuss?
I like the background. I wanted to say that. Or did you just make that?
That is my desktop background, which I stole from Jared Head of TMRO, who stole it from James Webb.
Oh, okay. Nice.
Yeah.
I have a topic we could start with, which maybe this could be interesting because I think it's something that we talk about in the SE community a little bit and we dance around a little bit. So it could be interesting to talk about.
Uncomfortable topics.
Yeah. So the idea of the infringement of free speech on like college campuses or social media outlets. So, how big of a problem is this? To what degree is it a problem? How do we know that? How do we assess this issue of free speech on college campuses, and on websites, on especially social media platforms?
Mm-hmm.
And my position right now is that I would bet that it certainly happens, but I don't think that it happens a lot. And
Okay.
my position right now is that I doubt that it's a large problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about outside of colleges? There's like the college university setting, and then there's like at work, there's at home, there's at social, at church. Any of those?
Yeah, I would say that it is a problem, but I think that's kind of also, I use that as a metric for how much I perceive it as a problem on college campuses. Like,
Oh, okay. So if college campuses are not any more restrictive than several other things that we're perfectly willing to tolerate, then it's
no,
okay.
I think a college campus should be less restrictive than, say, a work environment.
Okay.
Yeah, but I know just from experience that there are lots of things that I could not get away with talking about at my job.
Yeah,
that
NSFW is a word or a four-letter. No, anyway.
What was it?
NSFW.
Not safe for work.
Something.
Yeah, not safe for work. Exactly. Yeah. That I've been perfectly fine having conversations about on college campuses. I've had no issues talking about those things on college campuses. So, but I do know that they exist. I'm not going to doubt that certainly there are instances where it's an issue. But I think those are just instances.
Cool.
I think you mentioned once, Quayd, that you teach in a college. Do you notice this going on much where you teach?
No, I don't. I mean, like, I certainly have my issues with the structure of, like, I guess, education. So, for instance, like, one of the things that I don't necessarily like is I've noticed in some material that's been given to me to teach, even though I'm free to teach whatever I want for the most part within reason, that they don't want students to make certain claims. And I don't do that. I tell students, for the most part, as long as this is a claim that people care about, that is relevant to society, you can make the claim. And we can talk about falsifiability and these other things that I think are important, but they're free to make claims. But I have noticed that other teachers don't necessarily allow or like that. And I don't know that that's helpful, but they're still allowed to talk about it. And I haven't gotten in trouble for saying, nope, it's free game in my classrooms.
Nice.
For the most part, yeah.
It's easy to draw a bright line around what claims they would not like.
Yeah, abortion would have been one.
Okay.
And some of them I even understand, like marijuana. Like teachers don't like the marijuana claim just because it's like made so much. Like it's like what students beeline it for. So I think they're just tired of hearing it. I don't think it's like controversial.
Okay.
Yeah.
I also could understand that the teacher might be completely in favor of it and absolutely prohibited from saying so.
Yeah.
But if they were against it, they would be expected to extol that from the tower.
That's definitely not something you'd want to advocate for in a classroom. I would imagine.
Good day, Smokies. Okay.
So it sounds like I'm thinking back to when I read was it Jonathan Ross, Kylie Inquisitors? This is basically his argument too. I think that we should let some of these more controversial, it's a nice way of putting it, topics be aired to let them be freely examined. And if they can't stand up to examination, then they'll kind of die on their own. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Yeah, that's pretty much my position too. I will say that I understand that, like, I don't think anybody should be forced into a conversation.
Yeah.
So like if you don't want to have the conversation, if you're in a classroom that's having a conversation you don't want to have, I think students should always have the right to say, I'm actually not interested in this conversation, and ask to step out or whatever. And I let my students know that as well. You know, I remember having a conversation with another professor at one point because they were really livid about my stance on this. So I had an SE conversation with them about having an open conversation about things. But, you know, their position was, and I completely understand it, was like, so like Roe v. Wade was just overturned, and they have emotional issues with having a conversation with people that are, you know, in their view, trying to deny their rights.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, yeah, I certainly don't think you should be obligated to engage in an argument or a debate or a conversation with somebody that you feel like is denying your sense of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, you know, but I don't think that you should be telling other people that they can't have the conversation, I think is the difference for me.
Yeah. I think what you're getting at, it's like, it's okay if this triggers you, just bow out and let someone else deal with it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you refuse to have the conversation, you sort of opt out of being in the marketplace of ideas or being in the exchange where things could happen. And of course, we're all extremely frustrated by the 90-something% of the time that people will talk about a thing and just no impact, nothing.
You're not really getting anywhere on these topics because it's just becoming a shouting match back and forth about whose rights matter more, or like about autonomy and a lot of other things, and we're not really getting down to the issues itself.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's going nowhere.
Yeah, conflicting values and conflicting rights. There's a lot of times the issues.
One of my wives, Naya, is pro-choice, and so that's been a conversation this last week or two, and we have talked so much about the really bad arguments on the side of pro-choice, and then she told me that the slavery argument was the best argument for pro-choice. What do you think of that?
I don't know that argument.
It's not okay to enslave people, and forcing somebody to complete a pregnancy is slavery.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we would have to have a conversation about the definition of slavery, I think, would be one thing that we would have.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that there's a whole bunch of defining terms in that one. So, you know, when Naya and I say slavery argument, we've already defined terms really well. So that's obviously shorthand.
Yeah, to me, that, you know, my thoughts on it are always, so I might agree with them depending on exactly what's meant, but the idea of really for me is like there's no circumstance in which I would willingly allow someone to tell me that I have to volunteer any of my bodily functions, regardless of the circumstance.
Right.
Regardless of the circumstance. And so to me, then, in order to be equitable, I draw that line across the board for everybody.
Right.
I can't think of any.
The alternative, the argument against that, if I might be so bold as to push, is that you volunteered when you coitused.
That I volunteered my bodily functions?
When you had coitus. You risked pregnancy when you had coitus.
Yeah.
Volunteered.
Right. We're talking specifically about the female here, right? Are we talking about the male and female?
Well, abortion disproportionately affects females.
Okay.
But yeah, obviously this could only be slavery of females.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I guess like my point is like I always pose this because I'm always open to being wrong, and I used to have different views on this. Or this question essentially was posed to me is what circumstance apart from like childbirth, apart from pregnancy, would you allow somebody to make you volunteer your bodily functions? Like, give me one other example. And I can't think of any. I can't think of one other example in which I think it would be just or right to do that, which is strange to me. It's strange to me that this is the only, like, if you were a distracted driver and you got into a car wreck and you hit somebody and a child was in need of your bodily systems or certain, organs, even in that situation where, like, clearly you're the distracted driver, you chose to drive distracted and you knew there could be a circumstance in which you could harm another person that would need help at that point, need medical help, we still would consider that, like, we wouldn't say, well, the second you became a distracted driver, you volunteered all we would say, no, that's cruel and unusual punishment. And that seems to make sense to me. And this is not to.
I've come up with an example on the other gender.
Oh yeah.
In this case, to be clear, female is sex. It's the sex of females that defines whether or not abortion matters. And it's the second one is based on gender, but that's at least mostly normal. Conscription. Military conscripts. Is it okay for Ukraine to say that all males must fight in their war with them?
Oh. Yeah, I haven't thought about that.
Is conscription slavery? By a definition that would include forcing somebody to complete a pregnancy, slavery?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that would be any nation, really, right?
Yeah. Right now, the Ukraine thing is the one where it's happening, and I'm bringing it up because it's current. Whereas I could talk about whether it'd be okay for our country to do conscription, and right now we don't, at least in my generation.
Yeah, that's a good question. That is
cool. We achieved aporia. We win. That is really the goal for me with SE, is not to come to the conclusion, but to come to the new thing to think about.
Yeah.
Whatever you come to from that is probably better. What
do you think, Gina? Do you have any thoughts about any of this?
The example I was thinking about earlier, because I am in favor of autonomy, I don't like being forced to offer a home to something for 9 months that I likely wouldn't be able to support for whatever reason, whether it's because it might endanger my health or the health of the child in the short term, or in the long term, I just simply can't support it for the next 18 years. I don't think it's right in any case to force a mother to go through that. There was another example that kind of made me think. The thought experiment of, I think I saw this on Philosophy too, Dali, about the famous violinist. You pass out and you find yourself hooked up to, hook up to someone, like dependent on your blood in order for them to live. It's kind of the same idea. And kind of leaves me with the same feeling. If I'm going to offer something like my blood or my womb for something, I need to be able to do it willingly with the ability to retract consent if anything comes up later.
Indeed. Yeah, no problem with generous listening and gracefully accepting when somebody changes their mind. We want to celebrate that. We want to applaud that. We want to love people changing their mind. Jim B says, "Hey folks, so Great point, Dali. I like science. SE should always be on the cusp of puzzlement rather than reconfirming what we think we know. Indeed. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
we'll
love
say.
philosophy too.
Yeah, I like that too. Yeah, I like that channel.
Yeah, she rocks.
She does.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great philosophy content out there too.
Mm-hmm. I haven't pinned in the chat our StreamYard link. It's right at the top. I'll try to republish it often enough that you can find it. If you click on that link, you can join us right here in this room. Hey, Peter. Good to see you, Peter.
Hi, Peter.
You can come talk to us about whatever subject you like, and you can even abuse us. That's okay with us. Mostly, it's kind of consensual. Yeah, so I'm very interested to maybe come up with a list of the 5 or 10 best and worst arguments on each side of my favorite 10 or 15 wedge issues. I think as an SEer, it does me really good to not be flat-footed, not have heard an argument for the first time, so that I can deal with it dispassionately. And if there's something that I should research about something, I will have already had the chance to do so. So if anybody has, suggestions for what are good arguments and bad arguments on any of these things, throw them up in the comments, and I'll probably be gathering them together into a document and seeing if I can come up with a useful list. I've been reading in, if anybody else has any thoughts, I'm just filling space, so you jump in on me. I've been reading in this book by David McCraney recently. And one study he makes reference to is they took people who had an opinion on a topic, and then they gave them strong reasons that probably had decent epistemology aside to them, and gave them either 3 reasons or 9 reasons. I could be remembering the book wrong. And if they were strong reasons, they found that on average people became stronger in their belief. And then they had this other set where they gave them weak reasons. These are reasons that probably shouldn't convince you toward the position, but they are in favor of the person's existing argument. And they found that with most people, it didn't matter whether they gave them 3 or 9, but with skeptical people or critical thinkers or tedious pedants like myself, that if you gave them 9 weak reasons, whenever you gave them weak reasons, they actually tended to move further from their position. It would reduce their confidence if they were given weak reasons, and the more weak reasons they were given, the farther they removed their confidence. So I'm very interested in this whole weak reasons thing. I obviously want to strongly avoid giving a weak reason to somebody whom I would actually like to convince of a thing. If I don't want to convince them, maybe I want to be sneaky and give them a weak reason on purpose. Now, that's not SE. That might be deep canvassing. That might be other things. It might be lots of good things. But that's against the rules for SE.
The thing that struck me, and I'm only in chapter 2 in that book, so you have to forgive me. In chapter 1, he gave the example of someone who used to be a 9/11 truther, who went on this trip to New York and to Virginia with a whole bunch of other 9/11 truthers. And among the whole group, he was the only one willing to even consider that he might be wrong. And this is someone who was like really in thick with like other conspiracy theorists. And like everybody else in the group and the on that trip was would basically dismiss like whatever evidence they got as part of the conspiracy. They weren't allowing themselves to even consider it, except this one person.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering is why, in spite of like the risk to himself that they came from, like him willing to have the courage to admit he was wrong and put himself at odds with this whole other community of conspiracy theorists. What distinguished him from the others? Why was he willing to consider it when they weren't?
Yeah. I think you're talking about Charlie Veitch.
Charlie Veitch.
Veitch. Yeah.
I could be wrong.
Outside the book, I haven't heard of Charlie, so I don't know. Yeah, I who knows why he was available to that change. Just that it apparently certainly did happen. I've seen another fellow who was prominent in the flat earth, Ranty Flat Earth, now has changed his way around. He finally actually got convinced by a picture taken with a thing, with a mountain and that kind of thing, where he finally saw what he saw as a black swan, one that would prove unambiguously the results after he'd been able to do enough analysis. And he got smart enough at the analysis, he was able to convince himself out of flat earth. And it took 3 or 4 years. And now he does critical thinking videos. And
Wow.
And he's pretty good. By the way, as a flat earther, he was one of the least bombastic, nasty, angry, attacky people. He was one of the few I could listen to at the time. So good on you, man. You were good before you changed your mind. You're good now.
I think I was that way too as a conspiracy theorist. So I think that there's some, like, if we had to guess what the difference is, I do, I think fundamentally people, kind of two things that I hold about people is I think most people want to know what's true and they want to know what's moral. There's things that are blocking that or causing issues with that. And so I think one emotion or one component of the issue might be emotional, that there's so much wrapped up in our beliefs around our emotions that we use it for stability. And so when you start to, it's kind of like if somebody's standing on a chair and they're standing on it just right, it's not a very good chair, but it's holding them up, and you start to shake it, they're gonna start to have emotions and really not deal with that very well at first. But if you can show them, hey, like the ground below it is just as solid and you can come down from there, you can begin the reasoning process, but you have to get over the emotional hurdles first. So to me, all of that, dealing in those realms, the emotional components are kind of concomitant with it for me a lot of times. I expect it. I expected that if I'm engaging with somebody on a certain topic, a lot of them may end up responding emotionally.
Yes. Matthew asked, why would I want to convince anyone of anything? Or why would we all want, or however that works? When a baby is born, one of the first words it learns or is taught, very much taught, is mama, dada. That's the parents trying to convince the baby that there's a name for that thing that is the one talking to them. And then for the next, at least 8 or 12 years, the parents are almost constant flow of corrections and definitions and teaching and pushing their opinions and all on this kid. And probably most of that's really helpful, and some of it's probably famously therapy. It requires therapy later. So I think convincing people of a thing is a basic part of our social interaction. And the more we become adults, the more we want to respect that somebody else's opinions are as important as my own, the less I want to poke at people about any particular topic. And I'm left with, I would like them to think about the core reasons. I would like them to get their epistemology nice and clear, because I really like living in a community where the smartest people are voting. And I don't mean IQ smart. Oh no, sorry. Where the wisest people are voting.
Yeah, and I would say too, yeah. And like it may differ depending on who you ask, but I'm always seeking to either have them reevaluate their epistemology where there's a disagreement, or me evaluate my own.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't have to be me correcting them. It could be them correcting me.
Mm-hmm.
But this is kind of like, what's the point in trying to convince somebody that they should like leave a burning building if they're in there?
Yes.
Well, because we care about lives. We care about, at least I do. And I'm pretty sure I can speak for, I know you two well enough to know that you care about well-being. You care about the well-being of people. So if there are beliefs,
or we're faking it effectively.
Yeah.
Probably is good.
Yeah. What would be the difference there? Would be interesting. But it's just the idea that I am interested in, and I think this goes back to what somebody else said. This would be James Corletta. The only time to convince anyone is for safety or health issues. I think I'm pretty in line with that, actually. I'm not actually as concerned with convincing people who believe things that I think are incorrect if I'm not perceiving it as really causing any harm. But I think that we can deceive ourselves into thinking that a certain belief isn't harmful in order to, like, for instance, not disrupt our social circle.
Mm-hmm.
I've known people like this, like they say, well, I have, I have this friend who, is a religious extremist, but, they never bring it up. So it's not a big deal. It's not causing any harm. And my question is, like, is the fact that they're not bringing it up to you mean that it's not causing harm? Like, it might not be causing harm to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean it's not causing harm. And so that's just one example.
Mm-hmm.
People tend to deceive themselves about how much our beliefs can harm other people, and we have to be careful with that.
Yeah. What a real sticker is. I know a lot of people who are really angry with Trump, and then you ask them for a list of decisions that Trump made that personally affected you. How many do you have? And it goes from huge to small. I could ask the same question about Biden. Is there anything that Biden has done or Obama did that personally affected you? And if you judge them just by that, it's a much less big deal. Peter asks, doesn't consist of more than those two categories? My simple answer, yes, of course.
I want to highlight this one. I don't think we are trying to correct the belief. We're just trying to get at how they got to it in the first place and shine the light on that. Especially if it's something with a very high stakes kind of belief that does have an effect on others. We're not trying to tell them we're not trying to tell them that the belief isn't true, or tell them how they should what they should believe or how they should come to beliefs. More like asking a series of questions about how they did come to it, and what possibly might change their mind. They're basically examining all this for themselves and coming to their own conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
It's entirely possible that they'll come away later, much later, with a better understanding, or they correct their own belief, or nothing might happen at all.
Yeah.
But we're not pointedly saying, no, you're wrong, don't believe that, you came to this in bad ways. they're simply we're simply going through the process with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's important that we remain convincible and collaborative on the process, which is to say, if we discover something cool, we're willing to take it on ourselves. This isn't just stuck on transmit. That's important. I think that's mostly important for rapport and that kind of thing, but it is actually important to me to gain that learning about how to think about things better. Disclaimer time. The words and opinions of the people on the panel and whatnot are not necessarily those of the Street Epistemology International and so on and so forth. And when Gigi's saying that we should not try to argue with somebody regarding a position, that doesn't mean that we're not allowed to in our off time. People that do SE are also allowed to do deep canvassing. Deep canvassing is very similar to SE, with just the difference of you're actually picking a topic and trying to persuade, and you will include personal anecdotes and a few other things. But a lot of the toolbox is similar. SE specifically avoids the question of trying to argue a person related to that one topic. And we reserve any persuasion that we get in the conversation for the more meta, the how do we come to knowledge? How do we think about new data? And the topic that they bring, it's not to be argued against. It's not the point. It's just a way to look at the reasons in which that we come to believe things. Let's see. Is there an innate need for some or all of us flawed humans for some sort of delusion or unreasonable overconfidence in order to lead happy lives? I used to have delusions and no confidences, and I tried to get rid of them, and currently my life is happy. I open it to the panel. Anybody else have a thought on that one?
I'm having a little trouble understanding the question. I'm wondering if maybe one of you could explain it to me. Is there an innate need for some/all of us flawed humans for some sort of delusion or unreasonable overconfidence to lead happy lives?
A lot of people are much happier if they are certain about a thing than whether they are probabilistic. And do some or all of us actually need that in order to be happy? Is it, for some people, is it very difficult for them to achieve happy unless they can achieve perhaps mathematically inappropriate confidence?
I would actually say yes, but Jeannie, go ahead.
I was gonna try to rephrase the question as and please, Jim, tell me if I'm way off here. But what I think you're asking is do we have some need to delude ourselves and hold certain beliefs even if they're not necessarily true in order to be happy? Did I get that right? Did I understand you?
Yeah, I think that's what he's saying. We can see if he responds, but yeah, I would say like evolutionarily, we've talked about this before, but just the idea that evolution doesn't really care about what's true. It's not necessarily in our advantage to know what's true always as much as it is to, anything that helps us survive is what's going to be perpetuated. So you can have a belief that isn't true that is helping people survive. So for instance, if you have some fear or anguish about life after death and you don't have any cognitive emotional coping mechanisms, then you may be relying on that belief to ebb those fears, and that's going to help you survive. It's going to decrease the cortisol, which we know is associated with premature or earlier deaths.
So we hold some beliefs in order to reduce our anxiety.
Right. And I would say that, the other side of that is it can be really tricky to try to have a really high standard for accepting what's true and in managing your emotions around those truths, because a lot of them can be really hard and harsh. I think it takes a lot of practice and potentially help from medical professionals.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, so, something functional magnetic imaging, something researcher telling a patient something that challenged their identity, lighting it up just as if they were physically attacked or
Hmm.
threatened. Yeah, something.
I think I remember that, like the one you're talking about. Someone is hooked up to a machine, and like the other person in the room will challenge or deeply held belief, and something in the brain will light up, um, as if the person were physically under attack, and they feel like they have to fight back in some way. And it feels no different, like a physical attack feels no different from having your um, deeply held beliefs challenged.
Yeah, exactly. It's a strange way our minds work, and it's probably a strange and wonderful way because it's an approximation that serves us almost all of the time. But then we have these big brains, and we like to cheat at games. How important is it for the panel to have information? If a person learns something they believe, then their faith is staggered and they may have profound fear. I don't think it's important for the panel to have information about a claim. In terms of somebody doing SE, they don't have to understand the claim at all. Now, they endeavor to understand all the terms in the claim, but they don't ever have to have heard about it before. They don't need to have an opinion about it. If they dialogue as if they don't have an opinion, that's probably best. Even if they do have one, if they can manage to remain really neutral. Now, if a person learns something they believe, then their faith is staggered and they may have profound fear. Okay, if someone has that happen, that has happened with me 2, 3, 4 times in the last 2 years. And in each of those cases, I had the really blessed, easy advantage of following up with them, because these were all times when I could. None of those times happened while I was tabling. Those happens all online, and so it was easy for me to maintain an open dialogue with them, and do what I can as a complete rank amateur to support them through that time. How important is it? I don't know. If we were politically canvassing for a thing, should we do something if we upset somebody really bad? I don't know. Okay. So yeah, the idea that might be the case. Talking about really strongly held beliefs. By the way, in my tabling, I have a new strategy where I'm asking for medium claims. Like Anthony asks for claims that really influence your behavior. I want to ask for medium claims, something you're not highly invested in. The example I give is I have a scientist friend, and if I were to ask him to give me a claim about whether statistics should be believed, he's too invested. If he changed his mind about that, it would dramatically affect his life. That's not a good thing to hit him up with first on. If he wants to go at that later because he's really considering it, but that's not something I want to jiggle because it would be too much short-term cost for him. So I want a medium claim, something that does influence your beliefs, but something that you're not so tied in that if you changed your mind about it, that it would cost you a bunch.
I think that's a question I might ask more. Is like regardless of the claim, I think, and I agree with you, Dali, been there for me more than once after SE sessions, so you're really good at supporting your IELTS after the conversation. But I think that it depends on the claim. If I kind of get the sense it is kind of a core claim to who they are, I might warn them more about like what SE is, what might happen after the conversation, and are they still okay with continuing?
Yeah.
This actually did come up the last time I tabled. It's a very nice lady who just dropped in, and she had that kind of belief that I kind of picked up on could actually, if she started to question it, then how she behaved with others could probably change. And I said, okay, well, I'm not trying to change your mind about this, but in these kind of conversations, it can come up. Would you still be okay? And she said yes. So I said, okay, then we're good.
Yeah. I do think those really strongly held beliefs are worth doing SE, but not maybe the first go round. Maybe you want to have a softer introduction to SE. Maybe you want to establish a little confidence and comfort and that kind of thing before it. Not that I think it's bad for someone to just jump right in. That's okay. Maybe it's bull in a china shop.
Yeah, I don't really have anything in my practice that provides much cushioning apart from just like controlling my own emotions and then not jumping right into the claim, but building some rapport. But then also one thing that I like to do is to kind of have this conversation about like, just because I think of a good question that maybe challenges challenges your reasoning doesn't mean that your claim is incorrect. Right? Just because I've thought of what may be wrong with your reasoning here, there can be tons of other reasons out there that would completely support your claim that would make it true. Right? And that's I think that's something we should also remind ourselves as we're engaging in the practices. Is just because we can think of critical questions that call their reasoning into question, it doesn't mean their claim is incorrect. Their argument can be bad, but their claim is still true. And vice versa, too.
Yeah. I love the example of aspirin. If somebody believed that aspirin was good for them because it was all natural, and then they came to disbelieve that all natural was a good reason to believe things were good for them, would they stop believing that aspirin was good for them?
Right.
It might be completely rational to have other reasons to choose that aspirin's good for you.
Yeah, I mean, you could have somebody say, well, the Earth is oblate spheroid, and that's what we think it is right now. And you ask them why, and they say, well, because my parents told me. And you can have a fruitful SE conversation about, okay, well, if your parents told you, does that necessarily make it true? And maybe they come to understand, okay, yeah, just because a parent says something doesn't necessarily make it true. But there are still clearly plenty of reasons to think that it takes that shape. So
yeah, without pushing at all toward the idea that they should change their mind that it's an oblate spheroid.
Yeah.
It's just the why. It's the why underneath. Papa Long, I have a set of questions I love to ask people that have had a significant change of faith, and maybe you would allow me. One is, can you think of one or the main reasons that changed your mind? Has your morality changed? Something like that. I find it fascinating that when people change their mind about faith, that that they perceive their morality changes or it doesn't change. That part's fascinating because it seems like for a lot of people that are in a faith or not, that really affects their perception of their morality, or at least their perception of what are the rules for morality. Anyway, so inviting people to call in. You can come. We will be delighted to do SE with you on a claim that you bring, or you can ask us to present a claim, or tell us what a claim you'd like us to talk about. We're very willing to. Meta, talk about SE or anything related. Those are all good. We welcome you to dial in and say hello and
First
jump.
Peter 3:15. What is that? Does anybody know that off the top of their head?
Yeah, that's be prepared to show the reason,
evidence for the faith you have.
For the faith you have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So I needed answers. So the thing that caused your deconstruction or change of faith, or I'm not sure what the best word is, was that your belief steered you to looking into the details so that you could present, maybe it's persuasion, or maybe it's at least just an accounting of why. That's very cool.
I think that's definitely something that got me too in my process, was recognizing that that was something that the Bible was telling me. Yeah. Anything that's interesting. And to answer Dali's question, I guess for myself, was that my morality changed in some ways and didn't change in other ways. So that was like the big thing for me. I think some of the core principles stuck around, and then other ones didn't.
But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect.
Yeah, that's a great verse there.
Yeah, that's a big important one. Papa Long says my morality changed a lot. That's cool, and I'm details. Tell us things. Tell me the details of that. And the easiest way for me, of course, if I want to be lazy, is just to dial into the Street Epistemology thing. Though I'm totally happy to interact in the text. That's almost as good.
Yep, any way you want to.
Yeah, a big loss of community, faith, and friends. Yeah, that is a big freaking deal. I actually, when I speak to somebody who's very strongly invested in an idea, whether it's a faith or whether it's a non-faith idea, for which it really impacts their job, their community, their family, their whatever, I would hope that if they're on the extreme end, that they would not change their mind. And that's just me hoping for them, for their sake. I don't.
How would you feel about them lying about it?
I think that's inevitable. I think when people are going to move, first of all, I've heard pretty consistently that they don't have a choice about it. It's involuntary. They're doing a thing, and then they come and they trip across the thing that moves them a little. They trip across the thing that moves them a little, and they didn't have a choice. It's a doxastically involuntary thing. Once you've taken in the data past your epistemology, you then become convinced. It's not that you can just choose your beliefs. So while I can hope for them that they won't, I don't expect that usually would be the case. I think a lot of people, once they get into a certain level of searching, will end up changing their mind about things. And they don't have a choice about it. But yeah, like, for example, let's say somebody was in the military and they had some beliefs that patriotism and supporting your country and taking those risks was a really good thing. Even if I don't agree, would I want to convince them otherwise? That would be terrible. That would be very unserving of their interests. It would make.
Yeah, what if you knew that it would cause them to abandon their post, which would have them court-martialed, right?
Yeah. I totally don't want to have them like taking matters into their own hands or something. I didn't care for things. I have to look after things. Okay. So morality relating to animals changed. That's cool.
Your morality expanded, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
You're caring about more than just people. Is that right?
That's a good way to put it, Gina. I think that's also true for me. That's the exact way I would put it, is that some of the things remain the same, but definitely my morality expanded to groups of people and animals.
Yeah, no care for LGBTQ. Yeah, I
Yep.
I see that one a lot where when somebody has, well, in the case of change of faith away from a faith to like a non-faith or something else, then I usually see gay come up. I ask these same questions of people who change to a faith or to a different faith as well. I'm interested in relation to your morality. No, actually, I'm not even sure I can ask the question. Did you start doing something that you would have considered bad then? No, never mind that one. That's not. I can't. I'm not even sure I can ask the question carefully.
I think. Okay.
I've understood your words very well, Papa Long. Thank you.
I don't know if I've ever asked this or if you've said it before, but I'm kind of interested in both of your backgrounds on this topic. Like, were both of you religious at one point, or if you don't want to share, that's obviously fine. Okay.
I was. I grew up in a fundamentalist Christian missionary school. My parents were on staff. A Protestant, very, very close to Southern Baptist. And then in my 20s, late 20s, something like that, really pulled away from it. Okay, early 20s, I went from young earth to old earth creationist. And with that fell away a whole lot of bullshit. And I stopped believing a whole lot of stuff at that time because I was in a technical field and I became firmly convinced that young earth was utter bullshit. And so that really stripped it away. The next layer was I spent a couple of years galloping through Eastern religions, trying to doing an autodidactic comparative religions study, trying all these different things, saying, okay, what truth do you have? What truth do you have? And I ended up attracted to the Jewish community, mostly because I found I really liked the way they approached their morality, the way they made their choices, the way they made their social choices really appealed to me. So I thought, okay, maybe you guys have it figured out. And so I converted to Judaism and got really into it for 7 or so years. And then utterly crashed out of theism entirely when, through my scripture studies, I became completely, I could no longer take scriptural infallibility at all. My scripture study just kept chipping away at that until finally it all fell away. And then I became an atheist and was angry for about 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember reading a book, Why So Many Gods? And it's written by a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember having the experience of reading this and being like, oh, all these other religions are so ridiculous. Why would I believe this over Christianity? And then I decided it wasn't best to just consult that one book. So I actually went to some other sources. And then there were a lot of things that were not described accurately in that book. And that really, that was when I started exploring other religions at that point, after reading that Christian book, finding out that that author was clearly not describing things accurately to advantage belief in Christianity.
Oh, cool. So you saw the bias toward your position, saw it as a weak argument, and were convinced to research and perhaps change. I love that.
Yeah, and then I ended up just making up my own religion. Like it was a mixture of Buddhism and like Native American spiritualism, and a couple of things. And then I started working at a prison, and I ended up going back to Christianity just because that was such a jarring experience that I wanted the most comfortable thing to me.
Yeah.
And that was Christianity. Yeah. But then from there, it was just like, I remember, learning about radiometric dating, and then just hearing about like how carbon dating was flawed, and then finding out that like carbon dating was just one method that was used, and that it was always way more complex than it was being explained to me by fundamentalist Christians. And just, and then just from there, young earth to evolution, just always finding out that they seem to be missing a lot of things in their explanations.
Yes.
and then being like, this is actually good. Like they're not just using carbon dating, they're using like 5 or 6 different dating methods that are converging on the same dates.
Isocron for the win.
Yeah.
I think prisons are the closest thing to hellfire that the law allows.
To answer your question, Quayd, you were asking, okay, so I was raised Catholic. I was kind of loosely Catholic in a very devout family. It didn't take much. I was a very curious person. I was the only one of my siblings to go to public school. I went to Sunday school. And kind of, I don't think I entirely bought into it to begin with. Just being aware of, like, within a 2-mile radius of my home, there may be 10 different churches of 10 different denominations. And getting and somewhat being encouraged to explore everything kind of made me see early that I guess it started with a realization that this idea was too big. The idea of God was too big to fit into any one religion. So I went from Catholicism to Unitarian Universalism, which are, of course, like very atheist friendly. And I got to explore a lot of other things without necessarily needing to believe that any one of them was the absolute truth. I think I'm influenced by a lot of that now. I'm influenced certainly by Buddhism, by Taoism too. But I consider myself a atheist. I'm just now emerging from my angry atheist phase. Yes, it has helped a little bit, but it's not been easy for anyone.
Yeah, I think that's another common thing too, the angry atheist phase.
Yeah.
This was about 4 years ago because in the meantime, I heavy into New Age spirituality. I practiced Reiki for like 7 years. So it's about 5 years ago that I quit doing that. 4 years ago that I decided I wanted to, about 4.5 years ago that I wanted to improve my own critical thinking skills. And I kind of stumbled onto SE from there.
I wanted to answer this question real quick.
Yes.
Do I see biases of all worldviews? And I would say I have a pretty liberal definition of bias. So yeah, I consider everything a bias. Like I accept evolution, and that is a bias that I have. And I'm just open about that. But to me, it's a result of that bias if I'm inaccurately describing other people's. A lot of times it's a result of that bias if I'm inaccurately describing other people's worldviews, which shouldn't be done. I should be able to understand and mitigate my own biases to at least the degree where I can accurately describe somebody else's arguments. And if that bias is there too heavily, it causes me to question the source.
Indeed.
So I'm fine with biases. It's just about how that person understands their biases and tries to mitigate their biases that I'm really interested in.
Papa Long says, learning how the Bible was put together was the lost thread. Same here. For me, the last strike of the hammer on the anvil before it shattered was Deuteronomy 4:2. As I was going through with Deuteronomy 4:2, thou shalt not add anything to the law, and then it proceeds to add more commandments to the law than had come before. So that was like really messed. And I think Peter is asking, what do you mean how it was put together? Tell me if I'm wrong, Papa Long. We're talking about something like the documentary hypothesis or the modern morph synthesis that comes from it, where you see a Deuteronomic voice and a priestly voice in the original Pentateuch and a Yahwist and Elohim's voice, where it looks like maybe around the time of Ezra, maybe under the guide of Ezra in Ezra 7, where the Pentateuch was actually cobbled together into one scroll and edited. That's an example where we have the same story told twice with some different details. That seems to be evidence of like the multiple voices being gathered together, and perhaps the priestly voice in a different term, in a different era of language, going back and adding some things into Leviticus. And then, of course, the Deuteronomic voice being the whole of Deuteronomy, and not all in one voice of Moses. Papa, is that the one you meant?
I think there's also the idea about the Catholic Church sitting down and deciding which books to include or exclude in their Bible. I'm not sure which council that was. It's a few hundred years ago. I remember learning about it.
Yeah, I think for me it was the Gospels. Yeah, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and how those came to be named. First, figuring out that there weren't originally like authors to them. They were attributed after the fact, and thinking, okay, well, that's not a big deal because somebody could have still seen them do it, and I would take that into consideration in hearing that, like Papias and Eusebius, I might not be pronouncing those correctly, but there were certain people after the fact that were reasons we attributed those names to those authors. And I can only remember one in particular because it's been a long time since I studied it, but I remember one of the pieces of evidence was basically like, well, some people around here think that the guy wrote it. And I just remember utterly just like that was like my heart dropping in my stomach moment as a Christian, like finding out that was seen as convincing enough to attribute that author to that text was some people, and then some people think that he did it.
Am I allowed to put that in the category of dissuaded by a weak argument in your favor?
Yeah,
Okay.
that was. It was like I just remember thinking like I don't like that wouldn't convince me if I found that out about another religion.
Yeah,
that's how it somebody attributed it to that. Now it wasn't just that one thing; there were multiple things. That's just the one I can remember. But I just remember utterly thinking like I have to be honest with myself. I would not take that from another religion. I wouldn't I wouldn't see that as strong in the favor of accepting that was written by that person.
Jim, we are operating in StreamYard, which operates through browsers. So the hope is that if you have a device that you use to browse the internet and you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, or I think we're also doing Twitch, that the link that we've posted, I'll repost it, is that you can click. And if your browser's set up and you have a microphone, you should be good. A camera is optional. We like to be able to see your face. That's more engaging, but it's not strictly required. I'm just going to post that link again in case it's hard to reach. If you're in a browser, you should be able to click that link and hope for the best. Let's see. That is crazy. Just because there is a question of the authorship. I think he's not saying he decided it was wrong because there's a question. I think he's saying.
What I'm saying was, I'm looking for a reason to believe that X person wrote the gospel, and so I'm given the some type of historian or person that is the reason we think the person wrote this gospel by Christians. And so, for instance, again, one is Papias. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but I read it. I'm reading all this stuff, so not hearing people talk about it. And I remember looking at the list of things that this person said that people were like, see, this person wrote it. And just down the line, finding that I would not accept these as reasons to think that this person wrote this. And so if I don't have a good reason to think that this person wrote this, then how can I trust the source really? How can I come to trust the source if I'm not even exactly sure who wrote it? We can also talk about historical discrepancies. That was stuff that I looked up too. But that was just one component of it, was finding out that the reasons people thought person wrote X gospel were reasons that I'm not exactly convinced that they would accept from another religion. I certainly wasn't. I guess I should just speak on my own behalf, is that I knew I would never hear like, well, people in this neighborhood thought this person wrote it, so they wrote it. I would be like, that's not convincing enough.
Could I convince you that Newton was wrong because he didn't actually invent calculus? Another guy did, and he stole it.
No.
Okay, good. So that's not a good reason to disbelieve it. Good.
Yeah. No, that's not on its own. Yeah, a reason to disbelieve. Yep.
By the way, I'm not at all convinced that Newton necessarily stole it. That's just one of the things we talk about.
Right. Yeah. No,
Are Shakespeare's bad? Are Shakespeare's plays bad because there's question as to why he wrote all of
them? there might be. Yeah, it's like, just imagine the Shakespeare issue, except Shakespeare. Everybody believes that Shakespeare's plays actually happened, right? And they're like, well, this person, and not only that, actually, this is an important part of it too, which I understand. You could still be a Christian and think this, but the idea that it was inerrant, like that there weren't supposed to be errors. And these people are telling me that it's an errant, but I find out that every reason they think to have Shakespeare wrote this are actually not good reasons to think that he wrote it. That would start to call into question for me the sources that I was reading and what the foundations of this whole thing were built on. But it's not definitive. Yeah, absolutely. There's still other things to consider. For sure.
By the way, Kirklow, I completely agree. Newton is wrong. It's just an approximation that's good enough for most work.
Yeah.
It was really in Othello. I don't know.
I don't know either. I'd love to know.
Caesar was definitely a person. So
yeah.
Yeah. Caesar.
I don't think Prospero was.
Yeah, somebody made coins with his face on it. So, and we still have the coins. So that was somebody's face, probably. Might not have been his face. They might have, made his nose strange because that was sexy at the time. Who knows?
I don't know about the characters in the Scottish play or maybe Hamlet, but at least the Henrys.
Well, that was based off of his son, right? Hamnet. Didn't Shakespeare supposedly have a son whose name was Hamnet? And that's... Yeah, so it's based off of, the name is close enough. So.
Oh, based on true story, doesn't that necessarily mean true story?
Right, yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. I don't think Shakespeare's son's name would have affected my confidence in the whole thing. I wrote a book in which I named a boat that's in the book after my wife. Does that matter? People would name a boat after their wife, right? So, is there anybody who would like to call in and chat with us, not just in the text? Although we've had really rich discussions so far just in the text today, so that's very well.
Yeah. Thank you all for posting these questions and comments. It's been really amazing.
Mm-hmm. I've run out of stuff in my back pocket.
Well, I actually am still interested in the question of the college campuses. I don't know how
Mhm.
far we got on that, but it is something. I guess maybe I'm interested in either of your experiences. I know Reed has some experiences, and people certainly have experiences. Like the whole thing is the whole thing of street epistemology is centered around Peter Boghossian, who in particular has some umbrance with his experiences on college campuses, or Jordan Peterson, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think Peter Boghossian's a really good example. I
And a bad one.
Yeah, well,
Both.
really,
He's rich. He has range.
he has a good, well, he makes a good example of like how free speech can be limited on college campuses. I saw a video on his channel the other day about how free speech and ideologies are shut down sometimes on certain college campuses and education departments. I think it's specifically in education departments that the guest speaker took issue with. Um, but I think this is a similar issue to why Dr. Boghossian resigned from Portland State University, because he was frustrated with this exact idea that we aren't really allowing certain ideas to be aired in college campuses and learning environments, that they're favoring ideology over the truth or exploration of truth, like critically examining claims.
Yeah, it's something that I've worked on colleges, campuses, and I've worked with a lot of my colleagues are obviously professors, and I don't get the same impressions he does. I certainly think it occurs, but it seems to be occurring to me in very like spurious, specific locations. And some of these locations, even those colleges have a history of doing that anyway. So it's like it, but to me, in order to really convince me that it was an issue, I would want a meta study of all the colleges in the US, possibly other countries, and know how often are people restricted from talking about certain things. And I think that would start to convince me that it was an issue. Not that it's not at all an issue. I'm not sure of how much of an issue it is. But I've already shared my opinions on this, so.
Yep.
I think there's a reverse Q&A where he asks a bunch of college students, I think on both sides of the issue, on both sides of the aisle, like conservative students and progressive students, whether they feel comfortable expressing their opinions, or whether they feel expressing them would get them into some kind of trouble with professors.
Yeah, I forgot about that, but I do recall reading that. Do you remember exactly what the results were, Gina?
It was a handful of students, I think, said that they were afraid to express certain opinions in the classroom for fear of getting in trouble.
Yeah.
That's definitely something to think about. It was one of the reverse Q&A sessions.
Okay. Yeah. And that's definitely something that we should consider and think about and, run more studies on too. I've also had what I feel like I've had situations where students have expressed fear of expressing themselves in my not fear, but anxiety of expressing themselves in my classrooms. But I really think it from what I could glean in the conversation with that person one-on-one was any type of questioning of their argument whatsoever was going to be perceived as a threat. And so obviously that person had anxieties around expressing, but I would do that with anybody. It's, I have literally the same process I run through. Doesn't matter what claim is made. Somebody has to give an argument, and that argument is questioned no matter whether or not I or anybody else in the class agrees. But some people perceive that as a threat, and so they have anxieties around sharing their views at that point. And then also sometimes, professors are jerks. That's just that's the reality too. I've met a lot of them, so that happens. A lot of them are persnickety, and I totally understand not wanting to express your views to them as well. I get that.
Sorry, persnickety. Don't you mean pedantic?
Both. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Peter has a question. What is the most important thing that you know? And I was going to be first, but somebody beat me to it. Kirklow said, every conscious being is the same being, is the most important thing that they know. Okay.
Oh, wow. That would be an interesting claim to.
Yeah. And Peter can definitely see that would be an important claim, and doesn't think it's true, but can see why it's an important claim. I'm going next. The most important thing that I know is that I am loved and appreciated. For without that, I wouldn't have the motivation to do anything, even properly feed and care for myself. Anybody else?
This is a really difficult question. The most important thing that I know is that, and with deep apologies to my Christian friends, I know that I'm not a damaged fallen being in need of saving.
Yeah, I think those are both really good answers. Dali, yours in particular made me think, and I think that goes to part of the issue for me, which is what is meant by important. So I'd say Dali may be my answer, but then the other one would be the knowledge that I think that I have that I'm conscious, because it seems like a lot of other things that I think that I know are built on that first piece of knowledge.
So knowing that you're conscious.
Right, it's pretty foundational to everything else. But in terms of like important personally, it might be actually Dali's answer.
Okay. David, Can I ask you? What's the most important you know?
I have no idea what the question is. What is it?
The question is, what is the most important thing that you know?
That you get more. It's more. You'll get farther by disconfirming your hypothesis than confirming it in pretty much every situation.
Fantastic.
Nice.
Fantastic. I love it.
Hi, nice to meet you, by the way.
Jim,
nice to meet you all. I got a text message from Anthony Magabosco.
David, and then let you in. David, you have the floor.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you for giving me the floor. I just got a text message from Anthony Magabosco who said, "Hey, they're doing this thing. They just mentioned your book. You should drop in out of nowhere and see what happens." So I'm in the middle of building a new. I'm building a new bookshelf.
I love it when I meet my heroes.
I'm over here building a new bookshelf, and I got the text message. I was like, "Oh yeah, that'll be fun." So I can stick around here for about 10 minutes and see what's up.
Oh, fantastic,
Nice.
fantastic! Yeah,
Cool.
we've been talking a good bit about it was specifically the study about weak answers versus strong answers, and how weak answers would drive somebody away from a position they agreed with.
Mm-hmm. It says a lot like elaboration likelihood. Is that what that is?
Maybe it's chapter 9 or 10.
Okay, yeah. If I'm remembering correctly, there's a study where they have this is one of the elaboration likelihood model studies where Petty and Cacioppo, they you ask some students at a university, you tell them there's another university, one that you're not attending, and next year they're going to have a comprehensive. They're thinking about doing this thing where you have a comprehensive exam. And the comprehensive exam will be like a test of every class you've ever had. And if you fail that test, you don't get your degree. Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think that's a great concept? And then they would divide those people into two groups. One would get these 5 really well-constructed arguments. They'd been tested in a previous experiment. They were deep and well thought out, and the propositions were all sound, all that kind of stuff. Or they got like 10 weak arguments for the thing. And then they repeat the same study with people, except they told them, this is going to happen at your university this year. So what they've done is they've made it much more likely that a person is going to elaborate on the matter for one group. The other group is not. That ends up putting them on what they call the central route versus the peripheral route. And when you're on the peripheral route, you just look for very simple cues because you're going for like a heuristical analysis of the situation. Whereas when you're on the central route, you slow down, you stop, you're like, okay, I'm going to spend a lot of calories on this issue. This is important. And what they found was that people in the peripheral route were more persuaded by 10 arguments, even though they were weak, than they were by 5 arguments that were strong, because they were just judging it heuristically. 10 more arguments means a better proposition. A person on the central route, however, it didn't matter how many weak arguments they found. They needed some strong arguments before they would go along with the idea. So that's the idea there being is that there was about 50, 60 years of research into persuasion that wasn't making any sense, because it was like in one context, a persuasive message was great. In another context, it wasn't. In one context, a speaker was great. In another context, it wasn't. All the many variables that go into a situation where someone might persuade another person of something, they were just a big jumbled mess. And Petty and Cacioppo, to pass their tests at college, they in the house they were renting, they cleared it out and they painted all the walls in one of the rooms with blackboard paint and put all the studies up that they had to memorize with the results up there. And they accidentally started doing this beautiful mind thing where they were like, wait, I'm starting to see like there is a system here. There is a pattern. There's a sort of a mechanism of how people evaluate messages. And they developed the elaboration likelihood model from that. And there's another model called the heuristic systemic model that's very similar, but there's a big Venn diagram overlap between the two. But that's sort of the central thing of it is like some messages work well in some contexts and not others. And it all depends on how invested the person is in the issue, how likely they are to elaborate, as they would say in psychology, but also how capable are they of that elaboration. And sometimes that just comes down to how stressed they are, how much cognitive load they're under. It's very particular. In other words, there is no such thing as a perfectly crafted message in any. You have to actually really consider the audience, and you have to really consider the situation and how it would affect that audience differently than another. It puts people either on the central route or the peripheral route of persuasion.
Okay,
I love that.
Really
I love that.
I'm wondering if
I love that because if you're trying to sell like a vodka or get somebody to vote, it's better to go on the peripheral route because you're just looking for someone to do something and walk away. But if you're looking for lasting change, if you're looking for something that sticks, that can resist the influence of your peers over time, you have to craft something along the central route. And that means you have to really understand the values of the person that you're speaking with. You can't just assume that a message that would work on you is going to work on them, or a message that seems very powerfully crafted is going to work across the board.
Is this also then to say that it's not like there's a peripheral person and a central person, that sometimes people are peripheral and act in the peripheral route, and sometimes there's people are central and act in the central route, depending on the circumstance?
Absolutely. Depending on the circumstance, the issue, the speaker, the environment, the experiences that person has had, the family life that person has had, the current political climate that they're within, if there's a bear outside their door, like all these things change whether or not a message becomes persuasive.
Yeah.
I think that was something I brought up about because I just finished chapter 1. And the example of Charlie Future conspiracy theorists and then of Love and Truth that really hit me. It's like how was he able to change his mind given all this evidence when his comrades, his compatriots and friends weren't convinced by the same things?
Yeah. That is an important part of a thread that goes throughout the book, because I'm very against this whole notion of we live in a post-truth world. That's ridiculous. Like, if like we were never in a truth world to begin with. To be in a post-truth world, people
The
have always
realization
been,
that we don't know world.
yeah, that's a pretty good way to put it. I like that. We've always been motivated reasoners. We've always leaned on justification and rationalization for the things we feel, for the position that we come to an issue with, for the things we're motivated to express, our attitudes that we carry around. And it's more that we're in a post-trust world, but it's not like that's forever. It's just that it's really difficult to parse what sources are trustworthy. It's really difficult to parse who among us is doing their due diligence when it comes to any issue and what their personal motivations may be. There's been a great democratization of information exchange, and that has led to this little chaotic phase that we're in. It'll pass. We'll figure it out. I'm pretty optimistic about that. So I don't. But when it came to Charlie, he was a 9/11 truther who went and people were able to do everything you wanted to do with someone like this. If you were thinking that facts are all you have to do, like they took them to the crash sites, they took them to meet engineers, the architects of the actual World Trade Center. They had them fly in a commercial airline simulator and show them how you didn't need much training to fly into a building. You need a lot of training to be able to land it. They had them fly a real actual airplane. Like they take off, they got to the point where they could take off and land a prop driven airplane. They talked to demolition experts, all the stuff you ever wanted. And they met actual widows and widowers and spent time with them. And 4 of the people after that said, I believe even more so in this conspiracy theory, whereas Charlie was like, I'm sorry, I was wrong about this. And I felt like I wanted to understand, well, how come some people can get these facts from these people made them double down the backfire effect. And whereas with Charlie, it did what you dreamed it would do. There has to be something at play that we can take from that. And I don't just spend time with Charlie. I spend time with people that have left Westboro and the Moonies and other organizations. And somewhere deeper in the middle of the book, it starts to make sense what the off-ramp has been in all those situations. And strangely enough, it's very similar to what happens in street epistemology. Like what in a conspiratorial group, of course, a conspiracy, a cult or a pseudo cult or even a religion, often the major motivating driver is, as Brooke Harrington told me, the equals MC square of social science is that the fear of social death is greater than the fear of physical death. And once that becomes a motivation, that becomes the strongest motivation to engage in anything, thoughts, feelings, beliefs, whatever. And that's what it's what a person is interpreting you're saying is like, so you're saying I should risk my reputation and my place in my social identity and my private identity and everything that goes along with that by suggesting that these facts are the ones that should change my mind about this issue. And it's just really hard, right? And there's all sorts of ways to, even like if you're like looking at the James Webb Telescope images, like I see a lot of TikToks where the comments are all just like, they're very much people who are feeling, I think this might make me feel like I question my faith in some way. So the early comments are things like, look at God's wonderful creation, look at God's wonderful this. It's sort of a instant reaction to maintain my belief structure by saying, this is just more evidence for the thing that I already believe. So there's always a way out of it. The off-ramp for Charlie, the off-ramp for Zach Phelps-Roper and Megan Phelps-Roper and the other people I spoke with, almost always it's just a person or a group of people who non-judgmentally offer them an opportunity to feel the kind of validation that was the main motivation that got them into the group that they're already in, or the thing that keeps it sticky for them. And they start to notice that the core values that carry from group to group could be better affirmed in this other group. And it's if you suggest someone should change their mind in a certain way, where it's like knocking a table leg out of their social structure, you have to have a table leg ready to put it in its place. And even if everything is there and they feel it very strongly, if they feel like there's no one who will welcome me with open arms after this, it's just not going to happen at a very social primate level. And for them, that was really the off ramp. That was the crack that let in the light. I think, as I let it. For Charlie, he had another social group, as you'll read in the book, that called Truth Juice, which is they're truthers too, but they're the more ayahuasca third eye truthers. And he had found that he could affirm his values in that group. Loved being part of that group, and he had a freedom to change his mind in a way that the other people who he was with did not, because though he feared the same ostracism everybody else fears, he knew that he would be a complete excommunication from all social structures. He had this fallback plan, this social safety net.
So it seems like the incentives have to be right then at that point, right? Like we have to consider the incentives that people have to change their mind.
Yeah. Human beings are biopsychosocial entities. You know, we are social primates first and foremost, who by some beautiful happenstance of natural selection can use logic and propositions and all this other stuff. But when it comes to psychology, when it comes to reasoning, reasoning is just coming up with reasons for what you think, feel, and believe. And this is something I was telling Anthony earlier. That when you're falling in love with someone, you'll say, if you're to ask, like, why do you like that person? You'll say something along the lines of the way they talk, the way they walk, the way they cut their food, the weird music they listen to, the dumb TV shows. I love all this stuff about them. If you're breaking up with that person and they say, why are you breaking up with them? You'll say something like, the way they talk, the way they walk, the way they cut their food, the dumb jokes they say, the stupid TV. The same reasons are there in both situations, but they go from being a reason for to a reason against, because the motivation for searching for those reasons changes. And when you're up against someone, you're trying to just throw facts at them, what you're really throwing at them are the information that you have found that justifies your position. And you've got this nice shoebox full of all these justifications you've collected over time. They've got one too. And then you're going to say, oh, let me take some of mine out and throw them at you. And they're going to take some of theirs out and throw them at you. And it feels like if you ask them, why do you believe this? They'll say, well, because this reason that they have found over time. That's not why they feel that. That's not the reason behind the attitude. That's not what brought them to this position. They came to that position searching all the evidence in the world, cherry picking it to find things that would justify and explain and rationalize wherever they're at. But of course, you're doing it too. Even if you are right, if you are factually correct, you've been doing the same thing. And anything, as street epistemology is really great about revealing to a person, by holding space for a person so that they can introspect in a very particular way, you can start to discover, why did I choose that over other things? And was I diligent in my so doing? And most people have never experienced that. When I've been doing interviews for the book, I ask people, what's the last movie you watched? Usually it's Top Gun Maverick. And I'll say, like, did you like it? And they'll say, yeah, I loved it, which is a very binary answer, right? Yeah, I loved it. And then, what would you give it, like on a scale from 0 to 10? And usually people say 7 or 8. I'm like, 7 or 8? How come not like a 9? And without fail, this is the moment, and we all know this moment is like, and that moment, like that to me feels like someone is just they're transmogrifying a way out of the frame. Like they're definitely going out of binary. They're going out of win-lose. They're going out of debate. They're shifting into metacognition at that moment. Like, oh, well, why do I think that? That gift of why do I think that is something that makes all this really compelling to me. And I love the answers that people have been giving me. And sometimes they will talk themselves down a little bit. They're like, well, I don't know if I give it an 8. It's been fun and that's a great way to get into the topic of sort of guided metacognition and introspection and all that stuff. I got about 5 minutes, guys. I'm going to bust out of here.
Okay, 5 minutes. I have one for the question. By the way, in my street epistemology, I try to ask as many questions up as down. And I start with whichever side they're not expecting, which is usually to ask them in favor of their thing, like you just did. Why isn't it higher? Something like that.
What would I know the exact question you would ask, Dali? What could you learn that you don't know today that would increase your confidence?
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. I like to ask in terms of hypotheticals.
I'm taking a note. I like that. What can you learn? Okay. What could you learn that would increase your confidence?
That's something you don't know today.
Yeah, that's so good.
Google asks, I'm building a web platform for direct democratic participation. Do you have suggestions on the format in which discussions should be organized to encourage reflection?
I have a suggestion for you, for someone to reach out to. You should reach out to 2 people. This is a project that this is where I've kind of headed next with all this. First of all, reach out to Tom Stafford, or you can email me and I'll make an introduction for you. Just email me at davidmccraney@gmail.com. My website's davidmccraney.com. Find all my contact info there if you'd rather use a form or something. Tom Stafford is also in this place right now. He's really fascinated with tweaking the knobs on the context in which we discuss issues online because they clearly emphasize engagement more than anything else. And engagement is not, it feels like democracy, but really it's just sort of drunkenly standing around the pool tables and hoping somebody bumps you on the shoulder is what kind of happens on the internet mostly. And most of the platforms we spend our time. Tom Stafford wants to do something about that. He's a great scientist. I'll talk about him a little bit in the book. Then there's also another fantastic person named Anthony. I think his name is Anthony Bishop. Let me Google this before I give you the name of somebody else that I probably spoke to recently. There's this thing. Yeah. So there's this movement at called bridging that I've recently become aware of, and I'm going to start proselytizing this pretty strongly. I've got so many open windows here from about. There we go. Not Anthony Bishop. I have no idea who that is. Delete that. Strike that from the record, please. Court reporter, could you please take that away? Graham D. Bodie is his name. He's actually a professor at Ole Miss. He is part of this giant organization, cluster of organizations that I just became aware of. They're called the Bridging Movement or the Bridger Movement. It's just a gigantic, multiple thousands of people who have gotten together to try to do the exact thing that you're trying to do. And there's a huge community already there waiting for your input. And I reach out to Graham D. Bodie, PhD. His website's just grahambodie.com.
Probably our last question, because we've already stretched you too long. Reed asks, "Hey David, what hypotheses would you like to test related to SE if money were not an obstacle?"
As in, like the testing the actual method itself.
Probably.
I'm going to assume that's the question. Like if we were to throw SE, if we were to throw SE over to social scientists, the way deep canvassing has been studied, yeah, okay, cool. I see. You said yeah. Impact is the first thing that we need to get established. Like you need to have we need to do like the medical trial version of research in this regard, where you have a dummy version of SE and you have the real version of SE, and you have a variety of issues you work on, and then test people beforehand and after to see what the actual impact is, and then test over a period of months and then years how sticky it is, if how quickly people's social networks will reassert their influence after they have reconsidered an issue. That's the first thing that needs to be tested. And I will continue to help everyone involved in this to get you in touch with researchers who are into that sort of thing. I know Brockman and Calla, after doing their deep canvassing work, have moved on to other stuff, but I think that it's still there. I mean, this is such a fresh part of psychological research, and it's absolutely there's never been a better time to get funding to research stuff like this, because this is something that almost guarantees you'll get a grant if you can prove that it can be applied to a political campaign in the future. So you might have to shake hands in that way to move forward. But there's also a good chance that, like, if you were to work with someone like this, probably if I was thinking of like you want to maintain a moral high ground on this, and I hope you do, I would try to get in with someone who does research with the CDC, because they're deeply interested in how do I do a better job when it comes to COVID or the thing that comes next, like COVID, or just anything that's like even traditional MMR vaccines and so on. Their current messaging sucks, and they know it, but they don't know why it sucks. They work really hard and they put out lots of messaging, but they still tend to stay in that information deficit model where, like, if we could just make this clearer to understand, people will obviously change their minds about the issue. When the thing that's really at play is the values the person's bringing to the thing, the anxieties they're bringing to it. Most anti-vaxxers just are they're very sensitive to reactants. Telling me what to do is going to make me feel like my autonomy is a threat, and I will just say, I don't care what you tell me. Like, this is one of those, like, if I told you not to jump off a bridge, if all your friends told you not to jump off a bridge, would you do it? Like, yeah, they'd do it, because there are people who are very sensitive to reactants. And then There's also people who are very fearful of authority and the concept of military-industrial complex and medical. Like that's where the anxieties lie. And when you have that anxiety, everything becomes a potential justification for the thing that you feel, a way to say that my anxiety is reasonable. And with the power of the internet, people who feel that way can find other people who share their anxiety, and then now you have a community, and now you're stuck thinking like a primate because you're in a community and you're worried about what they're going to think about you. This is the sort of approach that can only be cut. That's those kind of stuff that can only be cut through by something like street epistemology. And I think people who spend time with the CDC would be very, or people researchers who go back and forth between the CDC and other stuff. I think that they would love to see what you're up to. So I'm more than happy to try to keep making connections in that regard. All right, I'm gonna keep building a bookshelf on this ridiculous Saturday. It was so great to meet all of you for the first time.
I understand having books behind you is worth something like 7 IQ points.
It helps in interviews. Yeah, they're like, "Oh, okay." Let's see, this is my old bookshelf. Behind it is all sorts of junk that was in my original one. Yeah, please, anyone who wants to reach out to me, I'm very open to keep talking about this. Obviously, I'm obsessed with it for life. No I in my name, though. McCraney at the end there. David McCraney, no I.
Ignore the first one. I'm going to retype that.
Cool. David McCraney at Gmail, and the website, davidmccraney.com. And, of course, the podcast is You're Not So Smart. But go to davidmccraney.com to find out how to find stuff. All right. See you guys later. Thanks so much.
Thank you, David.
Great to meet you.
Bye-bye.
I love the podcast, by the way.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. Welcome. Thank you, Jim, being so patient while we spoke to David. He jumped in like 30 seconds before you. But, how are you, Jim? I'm not hearing you.
I'm not hearing you.
How's that?
Now I hear you.
Ah, fantastic. The good old mute button. I've been trying to listen to a delayed stream until I figured out I'd best mute the original YouTube channel, and then I could finally listen. It's quite possible to work out the conversation, but you have to sort of concentrate really a lot. But it's fantastic to talk to you all, and I'm glad this worked out. And I'm thanks to, I think it was Peter who said that I could simply find a headset and chat to you all.
Thank you. So, Jim, you have the floor. You probably have the whole rest of the show. We have about 15 minutes. Is there anything you'd like to bring to us, tell us about, ask us about?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's just really fascinating talk this evening. I've listened to a few of the others before. I suppose I could just maybe clarify a few of the things that I was asked along the way, possibly. Yeah. With the morality thing, I suppose I'll start a little bit before that. Yeah, the process of leaving Christianity, it's the Church of England in the UK. I think that's reasonably similar to the Episcopalian Church in the United States, I'm led to believe.
I think
it's
so.
Reasonably laid back. They're not too evangelical. There's not too much fire and brimstone.
They're down the walk from the Catholic Church looking back.
That's it, yes. I mean, our particular one, there was a big aisle down the middle of the church, so they're okay with processing around, and it was a bit of Rococo bling, so it was more on the Anglo-Catholic sort of end of it, I suppose. Mm-hmm. So taken there with my parents, and I didn't go in the end, I think after I left the choir as a treble. And I think it is a slow process. You can't actually definitively pick the hour or the minute when you do change your mind. I think, if anything, it was when I got my head around the fact that I didn't need to convict God of innocence of existing, as it were. Just a verdict of not guilty would do. And I think that's if there was one particular moment, I think it was that when I was happy that I didn't need, the null hypothesis. I think it's sort of basically called, where you withdraw belief until proven otherwise. Yeah. So. But yeah, along with another angry atheist thing, I think I was for a long time, not just for myself, but for my parents as well. Until you come to the point where you realize that atheism is just a one-question topic. It doesn't bring any morality. I think for years, religion has had the monopoly on morality. So it's not simply realizing this one subject topic. There's a lot more things that you do lose that you think you had in the religion. I think we talked about community and family and different things. But I assumed that because I was a Christian, I was a good person, and I didn't really need to think whether my beliefs were true. I didn't really have an epistemology on it. I think I just assumed that I was a good person because I was a Christian. Not that I've started to do better things, I'd argue, by not being a Christian, but I think I've just sort of been forced to think about it because I didn't assume that I was just a good person anymore just by being something. I realized there was more to it than that. I think there was one more thing, wasn't it? Yeah, on the I heard recently a talk. I can't remember the chap's name, who was talking about an idea that people maybe needed any small number of delusions or slight overconfidence in their ability to lead a. I think he sort of put it
happiness.
Yeah, it's not necessarily happiness. I think his was more of a healthy mental health state, possibly.
Yeah.
I think, and he cited an experiment with some light switches, and they were sort of tampered with a bit, so they didn't work as you'd expect. And people who previously stated they were in a happy state of mind over, they believe basically they had full control over these light switches when they actually didn't. And then apparently some people who had expressed some slight unhappiness or depression beforehand actually got a more realistic view of whether the light switches were working or not. And so I try to be logical and for virtually everything. So I don't want that to be the case, but I'm almost sort of resigned to think, well, maybe it is true. Maybe you do actually need just a slight sort of over confidence in yourself, maybe. And maybe it isn't always a bad thing. Yeah. That's possibly a better way of looking at it. So I'd love to know your thoughts.
Now I act with just the understanding that I can be wrong, and I do it anyway.
Yes.
Yeah, I've had lots of times where I get stuck in analysis paralysis because my confidence isn't quite high enough.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, I'm coming at it from the opposite direction too, where a lack of confidence is a thing. And so I think that the idea there is to really recognize that there's not anything to really be confident or not confident about. People are wrong and people are right. And this is a quality of all of us. So there's not really anything to be overly confident about or underconfident about. It's engaging with people and changing your mind as new information comes along. And if you're in that process, there's no ego. The ego isn't as big of a thing in that process, I don't think. Or it can help to try to get rid of it or manage it.
Yeah, that's a profound difference in my life. I used to take it as a personal attack if I had made a mistake and somebody else found it.
Yeah, I think that's something like in academia that happens a lot, is that you're always trying to find the mistake before the people that you know are studying just as much as you find the mistake. And that can cause a lot of anxiety. But I like what you were saying about, change taking time. I think that that's something that a lot of people who get in conversations should take some time to reflect on, because I think everybody wants immediate change right there with their IL, and they become discouraged if right there on the spot the person's just not like, oh, I see what you're saying and I was wrong, rather than recognizing that change takes time. And if you can just get them to even like kind of think a little bit, that should be an accomplishment. You don't have to change takes time.
I
thought
think
that was
there
very
are a couple
sorry,
questions. I'm sorry, Jim. There are a couple survey questions along those lines. How comfortable I think one goes something like that. I'm comfortable saying that I was wrong, or comfortable saying that I don't know. Yes, that's one. That's probably one of my favorites. And it took me a while to really become more comfortable.
Me too.
It's beneficial to find out when I'm wrong about something. Yes, that's the other one I was thinking about. Thank you.
That's right. I don't know. It's certainly something I've been far more comfortable with in recent years. But as you say, yeah, it hurts so much, doesn't it, to be sort of proved wrong, especially when you'd like to think of yourself as someone who thinks about things reasonably and properly. And of course, it does suddenly sting. One of the issues that I'm so sorry, the previous guest who spoke, that's something I've learned sort of in recent years when trying to speak to people about what they believe. Try and tailor it specifically for them. Something I think along the lines that Richard Feynman used to say about teaching, you can't really have one method because you'll get one person interested and maybe another. You have to be scattergun maybe just to get everybody drawn in. I'm just trying to think of an example. Maybe speaking to someone about fox hunting, perhaps, who likes to go fox hunting. I don't think there'll be any point in saying what you're doing is cruel because immediately they'll turn off, won't listen to anything. So maybe sort of tailor it along the lines of it's traditional, but when does tradition become an anachronism? Maybe and things like that, or reasons that they might resonate with him. I suppose is the right word.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that you can recognize as an SEer that might help is that people are, and this is all of us, we all have egos, and we're all, because of evolution, highly motivated. Whether or not you believe in evolution, we're all highly motivated by our emotions.
Yes.
And so that is always a component that we need to recognize. We're dealing not just with a logical being, a person that reasons, but also an emotional being that their emotions are involved in the process.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. And the emotions will nope you right out way faster than the logical part will. People will be patient with logic.
Yeah, what's that saying that people don't remember what you say as much as they remember how you made them feel?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's something.
Yeah,
I'm still
point.
getting the beat on that one actually, because a lot I've gotten down like my own emotions and not feeling emotional. But you can ask certain questions, and the reality is you can think you are asking it with the best faith in mind or just in absolute good faith, but the person can still have a very negative emotional reaction, and that's what sticks with them, unfortunately, even if it was a good critical question.
I'm thinking back with my father. Sometimes if I went camping for the weekend, he'd almost tell me to be careful in a way that I'd already done something that was careless, and he was telling me off for it. All the advice he said after is perfectly sensible and true. It was just the delivery that I had the issue with, and sometimes I just turn off simply because of the delivery and not because of the information. Yeah, so it's vital, isn't it? It's a learning process. Or continues to be.
Peter W. Rush Limbaugh said something after the first Trump-Clinton debate, and I thought he was nuts. Which was the thing that he said? Because we said several things that you might be referring to.
Is it the feeling thing? How people made you feel?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, and I just remind myself that when listening to Rush Limbaugh, he's not always wrong. But there's my health showing.
I remember going to his rallies as a teenager. So.
My father was a big fan of Rush Limbaugh.
I think mine was too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, with a lot of people, the whole angry atheist thing and the, I would even say at one point I was an angry atheist, and then I became like an angry critical thinker. I became upset anytime I saw somebody that just was not willing to engage in critical thought about their arguments, even reciprocating. It's really frustrating when they ask you questions and you're answering straightforward, and they ask you a good critical question. You're like, oh, you made me think, and you try to do it back and they still won't do it. Right. But you just have to recognize that like people are emotional, and I like it. Maybe some people have the skill innately, but at least for myself, I guess it's good that I've had the experience of being a stubborn, emotional person, because now I could see how difficult it was for me to not become that person and then like give people empathy when they struggle with that. And it's understandable.
Cool. We are at the end of our 2 hours. Not that we have to strictly fit a time slice. Does anybody have anything we'd like to end us with? And I don't mean end us in some euphemistic way. I just mean, completely.
Well, I'd just like to thank you folks a
Thank you,
lot.
Jim.
I've been
Thank
watching
you,
you for
Jim.
a few weeks, and it's been really, really fascinating. And I've been telling everybody, so hopefully we can sort of get a lot more people watching. It's fabulous.
Yeah,
So
thank
thank
you.
you so
And
much indeed.
Please
Thank
come
you.
back again too.
Yeah, thanks
Will
for
do.
talking.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care now. Bye bye.
All right. Bye-bye. All right, all. Wave to the peoples. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thank you for watching. Thanks, Dali, for hosting and inviting us.
Yes, indeed.
See you next week.
Thank you to
Do this twice a
everyone
week.
who pitched in with comments, to David and to Jim for calling in. It was nice talking to you both.
Yeah, David was a special case. That
That
was
was.
a lovely treat. Yeah. So we do this twice a week. We are moving the Saturday show to 1 hour earlier, like we were today. Partially for the convenience of our panelists, and partially for the just trying to search out whether our audience likes it sooner or later. We're just mucking about with things, trying to learn what's best. And then we also do this on Tuesday at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, and freaking middle of the night in Europe, so it's useless for them. But that's our other time. And if you think we should have it at different times, sound off. Let us know. Thanks. Bye.
See you.